So you're thinking about moving to the greater Lansing area? Well, you have came to the right channel. This is Living Lansing, and every week we are dropping videos to give you the information that you need to have to be well informed before you make your move here to the greater Lansing area. I am Brooks Warner with the Mitten Home Team, and my contact information is down in the description of this video. We take phone calls, text, emails from people every day that are thinking about moving in the greater Lansing area. If you have any questions or there's anything that we can do to help, please feel free to reach out and get ready for some more information. All right, as promised, I'm here to answer the number one question I get from people who are moving out of state into Michigan, specifically the greater Lansing area, and that is, what's the weather really like in Michigan? How cold is it? So that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with winter and talk about December, January, February is kind of the core part of our winter. And we typically are seeing highs in the low 30s for most of those months, with the lows in the teens. Obviously, those are averages. We definitely have days that get down around that 0 mark. And then in Lansing, we end up with an average snowfall of somewhere around 10 to 15, maybe 20 inches in each of those months. Lots of times it warms up enough that some of that will melt off, so we don't accumulate all of that. That's going to be our average precipitation in the winter months. Now, if we compare that to other areas of the state, if we go down south towards Detroit and things like that, slightly warmer, but pretty similar. The major differences is as you continue to go north in Michigan, obviously more extreme temperatures there, especially if you cross over the bridge into the Upper Peninsula. Very, very different climate there. The other big change that a lot of people from Michigan are not familiar with is if you move to the west side of the state, most of the weather in Michigan comes from west to east. So as it comes across Lake Michigan is where we get a lot of the snow and rain build up in the summer times and snow in the winter times. Now in the winter months, how does Lansing compare to the other areas of the state? Well, if we go further south towards like the Detroit area, it's going to be a little bit more mild, but pretty similar overall. As you go north, going to be colder, more extreme winter situations, especially if we cross over the bridge, in the Mackinac Bridge that is, into the Upper Peninsula. Definitely much more extreme colds, a lot more snowfall there. They get feet and feet of snow in the Upper Peninsula. Now, if we look at the other thing that a lot of people aren't familiar with, if you're not from Michigan, is the west side of the state. Their climate's quite a bit different as well. Because of the weather coming from west to east across Lake Michigan, they get what they refer to as lake effect snow. So a little bit further west of Lansing is where more snowfall tends to happen. The Grand Rapids area, Muskegon, all the way up along to Traverse City, and that area sees a lot more snow in the winter. Okay, the other question everyone asks about Michigan winter is how much snow is the actual snowfall. Kind of informed you just a minute ago that the west side of the state in northern Michigan gets substantially more snow than Lansing. We're looking at an average of 15 inches in January, more like 12 inches in February, and dropping to around 7 inches in March. And as I had mentioned, that doesn't accumulate. We don't typically have all of that snow on the ground all the way through winter. We'll get enough days that warm up that we melt some of it off. So it kind of comes and goes, but that's going to be the average snowfall for the Lansing area. Now we're going to hop into pretty much everyone in Michigan's favorite season, summer. Summers in Michigan can be awesome with all the water, all the outdoor activities that we have here in Michigan. So what can you expect when it comes to summer? Well, it is humid here. As I mentioned, we have lots of water in Michigan, being a peninsula and having all the Great Lakes. So we have quite a bit of humidity in the summer, and our average temperatures are somewhere in the 70-ish mark for most of June, July, and August. We do have hot streaks that can get up into the 90s, with the heat index sometimes breaking in to the triple digits, but very, very rarely do we see that here. Most of our summer is spent in the 70s and 80s. 90s would be kind of a heat wave. Occasionally you'll still get the day down in the 60s if we get some cooler weather rolling in, but most of the June, July, and August is going to be spent in the 70s and 80s. Great weather for outdoor activities and enjoying all the beautiful nature that Michigan has to offer. Now, last but not least, fall. If summer is not your favorite season in Michigan, it almost certainly is fall. color change, apple orchards, harvest time, fairs, so much fun fall activities, and really beautiful weather in my opinion as well. So fall roughly starts around that September timeframe, and we will still have highs in the 70s with lows in the 50s at night. And then each month after that, so October and November, we're dropping by about 10 degrees a month. So the high in October is going to be more in those 60s, low 60s, sometimes getting down in the 30s at night. Most of the time it's staying in the 40s. And then once we get into November, we're going to start seeing the high 30s for our highs, and then getting down into the 20s in the evening and night. Sometimes occasional snow towards the end of November, but that's pretty rare. So great mild climate for all sorts of beautiful fall activities. Fall color tours, if you've not seen this, Michigan is one of the best states for color tours. There's Tunnel of Trees along M22, which is about 2.5 hours from the Lansing area, that is world famous for the colors in the falls. However, you can drive down pretty much any country road in the greater Lansing area the right time of year and just be taken away by all the beautiful trees. Okay, so I touched on this a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about the different areas of Michigan and how the weather changes. Obviously, west side of the state has got Lake Michigan. We talked about more snowfall there. Also tends to be a little bit windier on that side of the state. So there's actually people who will surf on Lake Michigan, a little bit larger waves. Kiteboarding, things like that can be done on the west side of the state because of that weather coming across Lake Michigan. Northern Michigan, all the temperatures that I had mentioned earlier are going to be a little bit lower depending on how far you go, along with more snow in the winter times. Those are kind of the major differences. East side of the state tends to be a little bit less windy because that weather is moving across the state from west to east. Also less snow on that side of the state in general. So that's kind of breaks down the different areas of the lower peninsula. Once you cross the Mackinac Bridge into the upper peninsula, obviously much cooler. That's a couple hours north of Lansing from a drive standpoint. So beautiful, tons of nature, very remote area. Typically going to be quite a bit cooler than it is in the Lansing area, especially in the winter. They have those extreme winter conditions. Now the good news, we have wind so cold that it will hurt your face in the winter, but the upside is we have very few natural disaster type things in Michigan in general. So we have severe thunderstorms, occasional tornadoes, don't happen that often, a little bit more frequently the last couple of years. Not sure what's going on with that, as I'm not a meteorologist, but the last 2-3 years we've seen more in the mid-Michigan area than years in the past from my memory. So severe thunderstorms and tornadoes are probably our two biggest natural disaster type things that people are concerned about. We don't have hurricanes, we don't really have earthquakes to speak of. So along with the thunderstorms, the other thing that we can have in certain areas of the state is flooding. It seems like you're thinking about moving here, and that's why you're on this channel. We have tons of rivers in Michigan. So if you are considering buying a home that's going to be near water, make sure that you're checking on flood insurance, because we can have some flooding with the heavy storms and all the different river systems that we have in the greater Lansing area, along with the entire state. So make sure you're checking. Flood insurance can be quite expensive. That's one important piece if you're thinking about moving here. And then the next one would be winter storms. Talked a little bit about the average snowfalls. Typically it's a couple inches here or there, but occasionally we'll get dumped on with a pretty large amount of snow at once, and that's when it can really have an effect on people's day-to-day lives in Michigan. If we get a foot of snow in 36 hours or something like that, we can see longer delays, along with ice storms sometimes in that transition of fall into winter or winter into spring. We won't get so much snow, we'll get ice, and that can actually be worse for getting around, getting things done, and losing power and things like that than the snowstorm is. So snow and ice storms in the winter, we normally get 1 or 2 pretty good snowstorms a year. The rest of it is just flurries here and there. And then the ice storms, a little bit less predictable. Seems like we normally get one pretty decent one a year that's going to delay schools or cancel schools and make it hard to get out and do things. So as I had mentioned, heat waves, that's one other extreme weather that we could potentially have with the humidity. When we creep up in the upper 90s, we get a heat index of 104, 107, things like that. So there are some really hot days that we see every year from time to time. So always be prepared for that. Just because we're in Michigan doesn't mean that it's winter coats year round. We do get heat waves as well. And in closing, just kind of an overall summary we talked about so far. Michigan has cold, snowy winters. It's got warm, humid summers. The spring and fall are kind of transitions between those two. Lansing in general is a little bit more mild than other areas of the state. Severe weather is possible, thunderstorms, tornadoes like we talked about, although they are quite rare compared to other areas of the country. So overall, it's a pretty mild, steady climate here in Michigan. I hope this video was helpful. If you're thinking about moving, you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can find out all the information that we're sharing about moving to the greater Lansing area.